Right, so we are all sick and tired of Nigel Farage, are we not? The mainstream media over-platform him. His narrative is divisive and racist, but where his ideas and his plans get broadcast to your face whether you like it or not, the real story here is the one that nobody is actually talking about. And we on the left really have to, because otherwise we're just letting the inevitable seemingly unfold. For decades, he's been everywhere, pint in one hand, cigarette in the other, performing his carefully staged role as the ordinary bloke in the pub who speaks truth to power. From UKIP to Brexit Party to Reform UK, he's been given more airtime than any other politician of his generation, until sensible people are, rightly, heartily sick of the sight of him. And yet, however much we might wish to tune him out, we cannot. Because beneath the noise about small boats and illegals, beneath the endless interviews and contrived pub-stool banter, lies a far darker project going ignored, and you only need to cast an eye back through the decades of his political career to find the link that has told you what he's been all about from day one. Farage's real agenda has never been simply about immigration. That was the convenient banner when it suited him. That was the scapegoat, the target he painted for people to hate, because if they have someone or something to blame for their own woes, they'll ignore the real causes. The real causes being the wealthy, and people like Farage himself with his Coots bank account. It was never just about immigration, just as Europe was once the banner before that when it came to Brexit. His true target is, and always has been, the European Convention on Human Rights, the treaty Britain itself helped design in 1950 to stop fascism from ever returning. Farage is now reducing that entire framework, 70 years of protection for fair trials, protest, free speech, family life and dignity, to the sight of a rubber dinghy bobbing in the channel. It's a grotesque sleight of hand, but one he has solved with terrifying effectiveness. So whilst mainstream news channels laud him for singling out people in dinghies, we really need to talk about the consequences for all of us, as for too many, they're being blinded by hatred, and the snake oil salesman will end up winning again. Right, so it can be argued that Brexit was step one, therefore Strasbourg is step two. And the question Britain has never seriously confronted when it comes to Nigel Farage is the one that matters the most. Why has Farage always needed the ECHR gone? And what follows if he should get his way, should he slither into power at the next general election? Farage likes to tell the story as if his political career began with Brexit, doesn't he? He casts himself as the scrappy outsider who toppled Britain's EU membership as though history began in 2016. But the trajectory started much earlier for him, and with a far more ambitious goal. He was educated at Dulwich College, a fee-paying school in South London. Farage was marked out by his teachers for his extreme politics even then. During a 1981 meeting about potential prefects at Dulwich College, one teacher allegedly remarked that Farage was a fascist, but that was no reason why he would not make a good prefect, which prompted strong reaction from colleagues as revealed in a letter from teacher Chloe Deakin to the headmaster David Ems. Already before the EU question had become mainstream, before Farage became a commodities trader and before even entering politics, his instinct was authoritarian and exclusionary. A Tory member at that time as he was, idolising Margaret Thatcher. After school, he went into the city as a commodities trader. His background was one of wealth and privilege. You don't get sent to a private boarding school without coming from means. And his father, Guy Justus Oscar Farage, wonderful working class name there, was himself, of course, a stockbroker. So Farage has never been the ordinary bloke in the pub. He's never experienced the hardship he's always performed. The normal life that you and I always have as ordinary working class people. The flat cap, the pint, the pub stool, the cigarette, all of it's just theatre. It's a disguise designed to make him look like the voice of disaffected working class people whilst remaining firmly anchored in the financial elite. So when UKIP was founded in the early 1990s, its central mission was not immigration, but withdrawal from the European Union. The manifestos raged against Brussels, against federalism, against the loss of sovereignty. Yet from the beginning, Farage blurred institutions, Brussels and Strasbourg, the EU, the ECHR. They all collapsed into Europe as the all-encompassing umbrella enemy, as it were. Immigration would later become the weapon, but the target was always broader, every framework that bound Britain to a post-war European order. The turning point came in 2004 when the EU expanded to include 10 new states, many from Eastern Europe. Under free movement rules, their citizens could work in the UK. Farage seized the opportunity. Immigration became the visible, emotive issue he needed to expand his reach. With images of Polish plumbers and Romanian fruit pickers, he could present the EU as a direct threat to British jobs and culture. They're taking your jobs, your houses, and all of that. By 2016, therefore, immigration was the wedge issue that carried Brexit. Farage's breaking point poster depicting a line of brown-skinned refugees crossing Europe. It was crude, it was very racist, but effective in its symbology. It made the referendum about borders, not bureaucrats. And the Leave campaign won in the end, but it was won by scapegoating, by redirecting anger over austerity, housing shortages and NHS collapse onto migrants, even though austerity came from those in power, the wealthy, the elite, just like him. The housing crisis was triggered by Farage's idle Thatcher back in the 80s and her right-to-buy scam. And the NHS without migrant workers cannot function and never has been able to. We've never trained enough workers for our health service in this country ourselves. The investment has never been there. This tactic revealed something crucial, though. Farage never cared about immigration as a policy problem in itself. He cared about it as a weapon. The easiest way to smash apart institutions, a convenient target to get people to get angry so that he could do what he really wanted to, by taking it to the things they were now getting angry at. First the EU, now the ECHR. And he's confident enough to now say it is part of his Operation Restoring Justice that he's just announced, a name which is anything but the sort. But again, it's all about smoke and mirrors when it comes to this absolute charlatan. What he's attempting now is this. If he was able to make Europe's single market toxic by focusing on migration, can he now make 70 years of human rights toxic in exactly the same way? It worked before, surely it can work again. The European Convention on Human Rights was not imposed on Britain by foreigners, though. It was drafted largely by British lawyers in 1950. It was Britain's post-war gift to Europe, designed to ensure that fascism could never again rise unchecked. Yet here is Farage in his old teacher's words, of course. It guarantees the right to life, the prohibition of torture, liberty and security, a fair trial, privacy, free expression, protest, family life. Article 1 of it makes it all binding. Governments must secure these rights for everyone within their jurisdiction. For an authoritarian nationalist, all these rights we take for granted are intolerable. Farage has despised it all from the start. He railed against the Human Rights Act of 1998, which enshrined the convention into UK law, branding it a criminal's charter. He mocked the idea of foreign judges in Strasbourg. He turned every blocked deportation case into a symbol of betrayal. What outraged him most was precisely what the convention exists to do. Stop governments from deporting people to torture. Stop them from locking people up without trial. Stop them from silencing dissent. Now with Reform UK's Operation Restoring Justice, the mask is slipped. The plan he has unveiled is explicit now. Withdraw from the ECHR, repeal the Human Rights Act, and deport hundreds of thousands of migrants in a mass purge. But it won't just be the migrants such an act affects. Analysts have pointed out how impractical this deportation fantasy of his is. But that's besides the point. The real goal isn't about that. Immigration is just the excuse. Dismantling human rights is the aim. Small boat crossings have become the totem of this campaign. Every night the public sees pictures of overcrowded dinghies crossing the channel. Keir Starmer, the idiot, talks of nothing else, making Farage's points for him, and god-awful channels from GBBs to the BBC to LBC constantly chatter about it and platform him. Anyone would think Farage was really in charge of this country already, but he's certainly dominating the narrative, despite his party having just 4 MPs. But the emotional impact is huge. The numbers tell another story. In 2023, net migration exceeded 1.2 million. Small boat crossings were between 30 and 40,000 though, barely 3 to 4% of the total. Most fly in to study or work. The small boats are barely a thing, but they're a massive opportunity for a grifter like Farage. Even in asylum statistics, small boats are not the whole picture. The Migration Observatory at Oxford shows that since 2018, they have accounted for about 30 to 40% of asylum seekers. Therefore, most are actually fleeing something, war or famine, to legitimately claim asylum, which they can do legally no matter how they get here. The Commons Library calculated the cumulative figure at around 29% up to 2024. And these are important humanitarian numbers, but they're nowhere near the invasion described in headlines. So why do they dominate? Because they are visible. Because government after government has closed legal asylum routes, forcing people into the channel. And because they are the perfect scapegoat. Austerity has gutted housing after all, the NHS, social care, everything we as ordinary working class people around this country rely on, all the services we expect to have that are being eroded. But instead of admitting policy failure at governmental level, politicians prefer to point at dinghies. Farage has made the dinghy his political weapon. And by collapsing the ECHR into the question of whether or not a rubber boat can land here, he convinces the public that human rights themselves are the actual problem. And that is the grotesque trick here, to make 70 years of rights that have clearly worked for 70 years look like nothing more than a small boat's charter. But what happens if this smokescreen works, as polling implies it is doing? What if the public really does come to believe that their right to protest, to fair trial, to dignity and care is just about migrants in the Channel? That's the danger staring Britain in the face right now. Leaving the ECHR would not be a tweak to asylum law, it would be a constitutional earthquake. The Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland explicitly requires ECHR incorporation, no matter what fools like Richard Tice might be saying to the contrary in television interviews. It was the promise of equal rights that made that peace possible. Without it, the agreement would collapse, trust would shatter, and conflict could well reignite. The Scotland Act and the Government of Wales Act both require devolved governments to act compatibly with the ECHR. Tear that away, and the devolution settlements themselves fall apart. Scotland would see independence demands surge, of that I am certain. Wales would face its own constitutional crisis. The Union itself could completely unravel. Internationally, Britain's policing and justice cooperation with the EU is conditional on ECHR membership. Extradition agreements, data sharing and cross-border security rely on it. Do you really think he can deport all these migrants without it? He's got another think coming if he really does think that, but like I said, it's not really about that. Without Strasbourg, Britain is cut out. The country becomes less safe, less trusted, more isolated. Diplomatically, it ended up joining Russia and Belarus as one of the only European states outside the system, and therefore making the UK a pariah state. And domestically, the loss would be brutal for all of us. Without the ECHR, there is no binding right to a fair trial, no guaranteed right to protest, no safeguard against torture or degrading treatment, no right to family life, no baseline of equality. A government with a parliamentary majority could strip them away at will. Protests could be banned overnight completely. Surveillance could be expanded without limit. Miscarriages of justice would be harder to overturn. Abuse in hospitals or prisons or care homes could just be brushed aside. Ordinary people, not just migrants, would pay the price. The answer is simple. Elites like Farage. Wealthy nationalists insulated by privilege benefit when rights are stripped away, because rights are the one thing that hold them accountable. Without the ECHR, they gain unchecked power. They can scapegoat minorities to consolidate support, but why just stop there? Then it'll be the disabled, then it'll be the low paid, those on benefits next. Where then? LGBTQ people? What's to stop them? If you think locking up Palestine Action is bad now, watch them do the same for workers going on strike over poor wages. They will silence critics with repressive laws and protect themselves from all legal challenge. Ordinary citizens lose the safety net. Families lose protections in hospitals and care homes. Workers lose the right to organise and protest. Victims of injustice lose recourse. But elites like Farage, they lose nothing. They will have their private healthcare and their offshore wealth and their media platforms. For them, dismantling the ECHR means power without restraint. For everyone else, it means exposure to abuse. Fascism will reign. The scandal is that this agenda is almost never confronted, though. Journalists may choose to fact-check Farage's deportation figures, but people in his thrall will just say, well, these establishment journos would say that, and it changes nothing. Politicians may argue over the feasibility of flights to Afghanistan and doing a deal to deport people back into the hands of the Taliban. Yes, Farage actually wants to do a deal with them, doesn't he? But almost nobody presses him on the deeper issue. Why dismantle the ECHR? And what would it mean for everybody else? The media, therefore, is quite complicit in this. Farage drives their ratings, doesn't he? So broadcasters keep putting him on. They absolutely love him. But they're playing with fire. Rarely is he ever grilled on the constitutional wreckage his plans would unleash. Politicians are cowardly. Conservatives mimic his lines to hold their base and keep losing it to him. Labour under Keir Starmer parrot his framing to avoid being painted as soft, and yet nothing shows him up as craven and cowardly more than that. And instead of exposing his agenda, they end up legitimising it. And so a project that should be recognised as extreme and dangerous has been laundered into the mainstream of British politics. If Farage succeeds, Britain will not face a policy change, it will face collapse. The Good Friday Agreement will be torn apart, devolution will be blown open, the Union itself would likely disintegrate. Internationally, Britain will stand disgraced and isolated. Domestically, the rights to protect ordinary people from arbitrary power will vanish. Every bit of legislation passed in the UK since 1950, pretty much, could be nullified by it. So in the attempt, Farage could screw this country up in a manner that would have people begging for the return of Liz Truss by comparison. Can a democracy still call itself democratic if it strips away the right to protest, to fair trial, to dignity, to free expression? Would Farage even care if it couldn't? If sovereignty is defined as the freedom to oppress without limit, then democracy collapses into authoritarianism. And this is the precipice Britain is edging towards if it ends up electing a Nigel Farage-led government. And the grotesque trick is that it is being sold not as an attack on rights, but as a way of stopping the boats. We are tired of Nigel Farage, sick to death of his smug frog face on the TV, but we cannot look away and ignore him either. For 30 years, beneath all the costumes and the slogans and his pint and fag shtick, his real project has been clear all the way: to dismantle the European Convention on Human Rights. Brexit was step 1, Strasbourg is step 2. The boats are a smokescreen. If Britain allows him to succeed, if the media keeps platforming him without challenge, if politicians keep copying his slogans, the consequences for all of us will be devastating. We need opposition to this. Zach Polanski, the Green Party leadership contender, has been warning about Farage more than anyone else of late. But he hasn't had anything like the media coverage either. Perhaps that'll change if he becomes Green Party leader next week. There's the Corbyn and Sultana project as well that will oppose him too, I'm sure. We need more voices like theirs getting more attention paid to them. This is not just about boats or borders or immigration. It's about whether Britain keeps the rights that protect us all or collapses into a future where scapegoating replaces justice and where men like Farage rule unchecked. The grotesque trick is to make us believe this is only about dinghies. The truth is that it's about the collapse of the constitutional foundation of modern Britain itself. And the choice is whether we sleepwalk into that collapse or finally confront the real agenda that is hiding in plain sight. Just as Starmer and Farage are on the same page over small boats, though for very different reasons. Farage is really after the ECHR, while Starmer is just copying Farage because he's an empty suit with no ideas of his own. But what both are very much on the same page over as well is their support for Israel. So Farage, I don't doubt, will be delighted by the potential £2 billion defence deal Starmer's lining up with Elbit Systems now. Palestine Action's target of choice as they are, of course, all whilst they've been prescribed, though. Put Farage in power, though, and what PA have had done to them will be just the tip of the iceberg, though. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.